Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. Today's video is slightly Halloween themed as we go hurtling towards that particular celebration, and whether you celebrate it or not, I hope I'm not the only one that's thinking, where has 2018 gone? Seriously, this year is going by far too fast. I can't believe it's nearly Christmas and I have to do more shopping. That makes me sad. But as we are going towards Halloween, I thought we could do a discovery of an early modern murder mystery. The murder mystery in question is the death of Amy Dudley. Now, a quick Google search where you just put in the words, the death of Amy Dudley, comes up with this result, where the cause of death is listed as staircases. Staircases? Really? Well, if you are like me at all and interested in true crime and the owner of a Netflix account, which seemingly is most of the world, then you probably have come across this documentary. So, in a wonderful example of all this has happened before and all this will happen again, let's deep dive the original staircase. Amy Dudley was born Amy Robsart on the 7th of June 1532. She was the sole heir of her father, Sir John Robsart. On the 4th of June 1550, she marries Robert Dudley. He is the fifth son of the incredibly powerful Duke of Northumberland, a man who has toppled Protector Somerset to become the leading minister at the boy king Edward VI's court. So Amy starts her married life in an incredibly wonderful position. She has married into the most powerful family in England, excluding the Tudors. But this position was in jeopardy because the boy king was not to be very long-lived, and as he sickened, it looked ever more possible that his half-sister, the dogmatically Catholic Mary I, might take the throne. The Dudleys had firmly aligned themselves with Edward's Protestant regime, so the likelihood of them maintaining their power under Mary wasn't very high. The Duke of Northumberland was very keen to ensure that this wasn't going to happen. So Amy Dudley was to find herself sister-in-law to a future Queen and King Consort of England, namely her brother-in-law Guildford Dudley and his future wife, Lady Jane Grey, also known as the 9 Days Queen. The coup to put Lady Jane Grey on the throne fails, and the entire Dudley family find themselves attainted for treason. Amy goes from being married into the most powerful family in England to visiting her husband in the Tower of London, where he is under charge of treason and in danger of his life. However, with the accession of Elizabeth I, everything changes again. Robert is sent for, he is made the Queen's Master of the Horse, and this is a role that isn't just politically powerful because of its proximity to the Queen's person, it's also a sign that he is personally favoured. The Master of the Horse is the person that's there for the times of fun, so clearly Elizabeth wants to spend time with Robert personally as well as politically. Amy is not invited to court. However, she still lives in considerable comfort, as befits the station of the Queen's favourite. Robert also allows her to make use of her own inheritance, quite uncommon for the time, to provide herself with her own household servants and clothing and lifestyle. So Amy finds herself moving through various noblemen's households, where she sets up her own rooms with her own servants. It's quite hard to keep track of Amy during this period, but we're fairly certain that by December 1559 she is staying with Anthony Foster at Cumnor Place in Berkshire. We know this because on the 8th of September the following year, 1560, Amy is found dead at the bottom of a set of stairs. Her neck is broken, but according to reports, her hood is still perfectly intact. Almost immediately, the conspiracies begin and the gossip and chatter swirls. Is this a suicide? Is this a horrible accident? Or is this murder? At the time, the principal suspects in the argument for it being a murder is her husband, Robert. But as time has moved on, other suspects have presented themselves, and in this video I'd like to explore those suspects, looking at their means, motive, opportunity, and also, where relevant, other actions that they took in their lives that may make it likely that they behaved in similar ways surrounding this particular death. In 2008, in the National Archives, this document surfaced. On closer inspection, it was found to be the Latin inquest report into the death of Amy Dudley. Now, the National Archives have provided an English translation, and there are moments in it that are particularly interesting, I think, to our investigation. So here is a close-up of the Latin inquest report, and I'm going to pick out some key moments that have been translated. So it talks about that Lady Amy on the 8th of September was alone in a chamber in the home of Anthony Foster at Cumnor, that she intends to descend the chamber by some steps, and when doing so she, quote, accidentally fell precipitously down the steps. It then says that in this fall, the Lady Amy there and then sustained not only 2 injuries to her head, in English called dints, one of which was 1/4 of an inch deep and the other 2 inches deep. It also says that through this accidental fall, Lady Amy breaks her neck. The inquest views this fracture in her neck as being an instant cause of death. It finishes by saying, the aforesaid Lady Amy was found there and then, without any other mark or wound on her body, and thus the jurors say on their oath that the aforesaid Lady Amy, in the manner and form aforesaid by misfortune, came to her death and not otherwise. So for the inquest jurors, this is an accident. This is not a murder. This is not a suicide. For me, though, those dints on her head, the 2 injuries, one 2 inches deep, that strikes me as ringing very similar with the injuries found in the Netflix documentary, The Staircase. Is it possible that someone can fall down a flight of stairs, break their neck, and have 2 significant head injuries, one as deep as 2 inches? I'm not a post-mortem scientist, but to me that feels awfully deep for a simple tumble down the stairs by accident. Another factor with these 2 dints that are found in the coroner's report is that that doesn't quite chime with the report of her being found at the bottom of the stairs with her hood still on. How does somebody fall down a flight of stairs, break their neck, have 2 enormous lacerations in their head, one as deep as 2 inches, so that's going through the skull into the brain, and still have their hood on? Is that even possible? To me, it doesn't seem like that makes any sense at all. Also, surely, if that is what had happened, she'd be found in a puddle of blood. And I would imagine that somebody reporting on having found her would have said, she's found in a puddle of blood, wouldn't they? So does that mean that she dies somewhere else and is moved to the bottom of the stairs where she's arranged, her hood is put back on? That's certainly one line of argument that has been made, that she is killed somewhere else, perhaps even by an axe to the back of the head, and then moved to the bottom of the stairs and placed there. From the summer of 1559, there is no record that Amy ever saw her husband again. So from the summer just before, we think she moved to Cumnor Place. However, she did live there in comfort. As I mentioned, she was able to keep her own household. She had, we think, about 10 servants. And in the week preceding her death, she was writing to her tailor in London. This is the letter she sends. We have a copy of it here. And in it, she says, "Edney, with my hearty commendations, this shall be to desire you to take the pains for me as to make this gown of velvet which I send you, with such a collar as you made my russet taffeta gown you sent me last, and I will see you discharged for all. I pray you, let it be done with as much speed as you can, and sent by this bearer, Fuin, to the carrier of Oxford. And thus I bid you most heartily farewell from Cumnor, this 24th of August. Your assured friend, Amy Dudley." This letter has been provided as evidence that Amy had no intention of taking her life the week before her death. Why would she be ordering new gowns if she was planning on killing herself? But of course, that isn't necessarily evidence that she didn't take her own life, either by her own design or by an accident. On the day of her death, Amy reportedly angrily dismisses all of her servants. She demands that they all go to the local fair. Now, this may not seem that unusual to us. We are quite honestly used to being alone in our own homes, but this was completely unusual for the time. People weren't alone, and certainly noble women wouldn't have dismissed every servant they had to be alone for a whole afternoon. Her servants attempted to argue with her, to dissuade her, and she got more and more agitated till eventually they capitulated. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why does Amy dismiss her servants? What could have inspired that action? And we'll look at that as we go into the cases for each suspect. Also of note is the reports that Amy was very careful about what she ate. Now, some people have read this as a sign of an eating disorder, perhaps a symptom of her stress or depression, the sort of thing that could have led her to attempt suicide. Others have read it as evidence that she feared that she was being poisoned, perhaps because she was, or perhaps because she was experiencing the paranoid delusions of mental illness. It has also been reported that Amy was heard praying for deliverance from her situation. Now, what situation that was is not made clear, but this is the report that comes down. A Spanish report dated April 1560, so the months before Amy's death, suggests that Amy was unwell. In fact, the symptoms they list sound a lot like breast cancer. So we have perhaps evidence that Amy is ill, either in mind or body, that she perhaps was agitated and distressed, that she is praying for deliverance from her situation. Now, the deliverance therefore could be her illness, or it could be the fact that she hasn't seen her husband since the previous summer. It's unclear, and that's where the mystery lies, and that's where rumours and occasionally political deception and propaganda can fill the gaps. So let's have a look at those suspects. Suspect number 1, Queen Elizabeth I. In terms of means, there is quite simply nobody with the power or influence within England that comes even close to equivalent to hers. So it's entirely plausible that she was able to convince somebody to act on her behalf in the death of Amy Dudley. She would also have had to be very sure that the person that she convinced to do this would have remained quiet about their role in it. But Elizabeth is a very savvy operator, and it's entirely likely for me that she would have been able to know who she could trust. In terms of motive, Elizabeth, I believe, was entirely in love with Robert Dudley. Also, she has her counsellors pushing her to marry and produce an heir. She had seen the disastrous foreign match that her sister had undertaken with Philip of Spain, so perhaps an English match with a childhood friend who she found personally agreeable made a lot of sense to her in the production of an heir. Perhaps Amy Dudley is a wife in the way of this marriage that the Queen wishes to make. In terms of opportunity, who could get Amy Dudley to clear her house? Well, speaking personally, if I'm being completely honest, if our Queen wrote to me and said, look, you need to clear your house of everybody. No one can know I'm coming. It needs to be completely private. It's a issue of national security. Would I clear my house and not tell anybody the reason why? Yes, I probably would. Is it therefore likely that Amy Dudley, living when she did, under the monarch she lived under, who had even more power, would be inspired to act in a similar way? Quite possibly. She is the wife of the Queen's favourite. If the Queen tells her to do something, whatever she may feel about the particular favouritism shown to her husband, she knows the power and prestige it brings. Is it likely that she would disobey her monarch? No, it's not. In terms of Elizabeth's character, is she capable of this level of deception? Well, during the reign of her sister Mary I, she certainly knew that Wyatt was planning to rebel against her and to kill Mary I. Elizabeth receives a letter talking about exactly that, which she doesn't report to anybody. She also manages to slip the proverbial noose of being tied up in the treason that was. So she is capable of deception, and she is also capable of being conniving enough to get the taint of treason off of her against an incredibly suspicious half-sister. Equally, Elizabeth is prone to jealousy. We can see that in the fact that she doesn't permit wives to come to court, the fact that Amy is kept separate from her husband. Also, when later in her reign, Robert secretly marries Lettice Knollys, she loses her mind. She banishes them both from court. They are in total disgrace. And when Robert slowly makes his way back into the fold, Lettice is absolutely not allowed to come back to court. It's still no wives allowed. However, if she did plan the death of Amy Dudley in this way, why doesn't she marry Robert? If that's the motive behind it, why doesn't she move forward? Is it because she didn't have any part in the death and she's as horrified as everybody else because of the scandal that it surrounds? Or was she not aware of the scandal that would be caused? That to me seems unlikely. Elizabeth is a chess player in my mind. She's always about 8 moves ahead. It's unfathomable to me that she wouldn't have thought that Amy being found bludgeoned at the bottom of the set of stairs wouldn't have raised a few eyebrows. If she wanted to do away with Amy, I think poison is a much more effective solution. And perhaps Amy's suspicion about poisoning her food, maybe somebody, like Elizabeth, was moving in that direction. Suspect number 2, the husband, Robert Dudley. Does he have the means? Well, as the Queen's Master of the Horse, he occupies a position of extraordinary influence. So yes, it's possible that he could have convinced somebody to act on his behalf. Before her move to Cumnor, it's believed that Amy may have been staying with Sir Richard Verney, who is a close client of Robert's. Now, if she was concerned about being poisoned, perhaps it starts in his household. Perhaps even that's what inspires her move to Cumnor. There she is under the roof of Anthony Foster. Some people suggest that Foster is actually her kinsman, but he is also listed as being a servant of Robert Dudley. Now, if he's a servant of Robert Dudley at the time of Amy's death, does this make him willing to open up his household to a potential assassin, or to even perpetrate such an assassination himself? Perhaps. What's Robert Dudley's motive? He may well have been in love with the Queen. I think he was almost certainly in love with the idea that he might be the husband of the Queen and de facto king. He comes from a family where staying close to power seems to be in the bloodline. In terms of opportunity, now this is where, for me, the Robert Dudley angle is slightly baggier. I'm not sure that a husband writing to a wife and saying, dismiss all of your servants, I'm coming home, don't tell anybody. I'm not sure that this would be something that she would have kept secret, particularly if they actually did have a happy marriage. She would have wanted to ensure that he came home to a comfortable place where there was food prepared. And I think that the idea that she wouldn't have had to tell her kitchen staff to produce extra food is very unlikely. So if Robert is getting Amy to clear the house secretly, he's probably going to have to get somebody else to do it for him. Now that's entirely possible, but I don't think a letter from him would have necessarily meant that Amy would have cleared the house and kept it a secret. She might have cleared the house, but I'm not sure of the secrecy angle. That doesn't seem quite likely to me, I suppose. In terms of past behaviour being an indicator of future action, Robert and his family, in being involved with the plot to put Lady Jane Grey on the throne, to me shows that there is simply no depth and no risk that the Dudleys, and I'm including Robert in that, would take to get close and maintain their hold on power. Marriage to the Queen would do just that, particularly if in doing so you father an heir to England. Being the father of the future king or queen makes your position unassailable. It is essentially the best thing that an ambitious, power-hungry person can do, is marry the monarch and give them a child. However, Robert Dudley also ensures that there is an inquest or an investigation into Amy's death. He's very keen to find out what happens. He makes sure that she is buried with the full honours that are requisite to her estate in life. But he doesn't turn up to the funeral, and he also doesn't erect a monument to her honour. So on the one hand, he's acting like a loving, concerned husband, but on the other, he's completely dismissive. By not turning up to the funeral, and certainly by not erecting a monument to her honour, the gossip goes around that it is much to his discredit that he behaved in such a way. The rumours continue to swirl about Robert Dudley's involvement in his wife's death. Indeed, as late as 1584, a libel entitled Leicester's Commonwealth is published, which accuses Robert of trying to poison and eventually arranging to kill his wife. This does not go away, and it follows him throughout the rest of his life. Now, he may be an ambitious man, but he's not a stupid one. So once again, having her bludgeoned to death at the bottom of the stairs is going to look bad. While I could certainly see him having her poisoned, I don't know if he would have her killed in this incredibly blatant way, in a way that is so questionable. Suspect number 3, Lord Burleigh, William Cecil. I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that any of the 3 suspects I've listed put their hands on Amy themselves and caused her injuries. In fact, I think it's incredibly unlikely, particularly in the case of these 3. They are so high profile that them being missing from court, and at this point the court was at Windsor, to do the over a day's ride, even on the fastest horse, to Cumnor Place, I think that them being missing that long from court and having no other way to account for their whereabouts, with a death as high profile and as gossiped about as this one, is quite unlikely. However, their position and their visibility also brings with it, as I've mentioned in the 2 other cases, a lot of power and a lot of influence. And William Cecil, as Elizabeth's chief political advisor, has just that level of influence. He has people, I believe, in virtually every household in England working as his spies. He knows what's going on. Now, we know Francis Walsingham as Elizabeth's spymaster, but I think it's entirely possible that William Cecil has a similar network of spies to the one that Walsingham is famous for having. So William Cecil clearly has exactly the same means to commit and perpetrate this act as Robert Dudley and even as the Queen herself. He has the power and influence to get somebody to work on his behalf, and he quite possibly has spies and factors working in every household of the country, including Cumnor Place. And if Foster is indeed by this point a servant of Dudley's, that's a household that William Cecil is going to want to be in. He doesn't particularly like Dudley very much, so anybody who's associated with him, he's going to want to have spies in that household. But what's William Cecil's motive? Why on earth would he kill his rival's wife and therefore free him up to marry the Queen? Well, that's just it. By having Amy found dead at the bottom of the stairs with these dints in her head, controversy is naturally going to swirl. Gossip and rumour are going to run rife. If he had been worried that Amy might die of some other cause, perhaps undetectable poison or a creeping illness, as had been rumoured, he perhaps felt that he had to act to kill Amy and leave her in such a way that Robert Dudley's reputation would be irrevocably tarnished, that any potential marriage to the Queen would have to be called off. Queen Elizabeth cannot find herself in a position where she is marrying a man who is accused of killing his wife so that he can marry her. It simply has too negative a look on the global political stage. With Amy dying in this way, it ensures for William Cecil that Robert Dudley will never be his king or his king consort. Now, in terms of opportunity, unlike Robert Dudley, I think that William Cecil occupies a position in Amy's mind that would be very like Elizabeth I's. William Cecil essentially like a prime minister. If the prime minister writes to you and says, clear your house, don't tell anybody who's coming, this has to be a secret, it's about national security. Do you clear your house? I think quite possibly you do. And do you clear your house secretly? Yes, I think you do. So would William Cecil have been able to write to Amy and encourage her to clear her household secretly? Very possibly. Is there anything in William Cecil's character or behaviours that would point to him being capable of acting in such a way? Well, if we look later in the reign, specifically to the actions that took place around the execution of Mary Queen of Scots, I think that we can see a slight consistency in behaviour. Elizabeth had signed Mary's death warrant. She'd handed it over on the explicit instructions that it was not to be sent or acted upon without her prior consent. Unbeknownst to her, Cecil calls a meeting of the Privy Council where they decide to act on this execution warrant. Mary Queen of Scots is executed at Fotheringay Castle before Elizabeth apparently knows what's happening. Certainly she presents as being absolutely enraged that such a deed has taken place behind her back. What this speaks to for me is William Cecil's willingness and capacity to act against or without the authority of the Queen because he believes that he knows what is best for England. At that time, he saw Mary Queen of Scots as the greatest threat to the realm. He believed that Elizabeth was incapable of seeing how dangerous she was and of acting against her. Is it possible that earlier in the reign he'd already done something similar? That his fear that Robert Dudley might do away with his wife or that his sick wife might pass from natural causes, is it possible that he saw this as the greatest threat facing the realm at that time? The thought that Robert Dudley could become husband to the Queen? Did he act in backhanded and back-channeled ways to ensure that such a thing could never happen by killing Amy Dudley? Of course, there is also suspect number 4, and suspect is perhaps the wrong word, but I suppose responsible party number 4, and that is, of course, Amy Dudley herself. We can't ignore the fact that it's entirely possible that this was an accident. Tudor houses are not built to the same specifications as us, and staircases can be slippery and uneven and have very sharp edges on them. So yes, on a Tudor staircase, perhaps somebody could fall down and cause those sorts of injuries to their head. But if it wasn't an accident, would Amy have taken her own life? Suicide then and now is a taboo. But then it had the added fear factor that it's a mortal sin. In an incredibly religious world, it's unthinkable that a woman like Amy would have believed that in taking her own life, she would not have been opening herself up to an eternity of persecution in purgatory or hell, most likely hell as she came from a Protestant family. Taking her own life as a mortal sin would have meant that she would have been irredeemable. Also, if her suicide had been ruled as such, she wouldn't have even been allowed to be buried in a Christian setting. So, on that regard, she would have had to be under extraordinary duress to attempt or complete suicide. So what could have caused that duress? Well, if we believe the Spanish reports that she was suffering from an illness, perhaps breast cancer, maybe she was in extraordinary pain. If her reticence to eat certain foods was a symptom of her depression, or perhaps even problems with her stomach, maybe again, illness, mental or physical, drove her to see that she couldn't see another way out apart from taking her own life. Perhaps that is what she was overheard praying for deliverance from her situation. Perhaps the situation in question is this incredible physical pain. Perhaps there was mental anguish. She may have believed that her husband was in love with the Queen. Maybe she was frightened or had heard rumours that he was planning to annul their marriage so that he could marry Elizabeth. Could the distress of that betrayal or upheaval have been enough for her to attempt to take her own life and have been successful? There are a number of things about this case that are confusing and don't seem to make sense. Amy's actions on the day of her death, that anger of making people leave the household, is this because she's received a letter demanding it and she's quite worried about who's coming? Or is she attempting to clear the house so she can do what she has intended to do? But then why then, 15 days previously, was she cheerfully writing to her tailor, ordering new dresses? Is this really the mark of somebody who has got a prolonged period of distress, so much so that they culminate in taking their own life? If 15 days earlier she's jovially writing to her tailor, asking about dresses. Similarly, even if someone can fall down the stairs, break their neck and have these dints in their head, why is there a report that mentions that her hood is still in place and makes no mention of a pool of blood at the bottom of the stairs? There are so many things, and at so far a historical remove, that make very little sense, and I don't think that we're ever going to find the real answer, but that's what you're here for, and that's why I'm going to leave this poll card up at the top, because I don't really have a full idea on who I think or what I think is responsible for the death of Amy Dudley. I find the fascinating thing to be the furore that surrounds it and this gossip circle that still today people are investigating. So I hope you'll take part in the poll and tell me who or what you think was responsible for the death of Amy Dudley. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. I've certainly enjoyed spending this time with you. If you have enjoyed it, please give it a like. If you're not already, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you get notifications of when I'm next uploading. I'm going to leave the links to my social media in the description box down below, so feel free to come and find me over there as well. I'm happy to chat with you in the comments or on my social media. I hope you have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Bye-bye for now.